And so you're going to hear me say this a lot. It depends. And so why does it depend? Well, first, there's some vocabulary that we need to get out of the way. There's two things that came up there, post-COVID that gained more prevalence: test blind and test optional. Test blind would mean it doesn't matter. You don't need to submit your scores. Unfortunately, for test blind, that's a very small portion of schools do test blind. It means they don't look at tests at all. They don't factor them into the admissions decision whatsoever. Many more schools go with the test optional route, meaning that the student can decide if they want to submit their scores. And now this is like compounded because you can decide at each individual school if you want to send your scores. So it's not, do I use scores for all of my applications? It's, do I use scores for specific schools? And you can make a one-by-one decision on all of those. So test blind, where they don't look at it at all, is about 80 schools. It's 80 of the 2,500 four-year institutions that don't look at them at all. Most of them are in California. We'll take a look at some of those. But test optional is ubiquitous now. It's very, very common. So then it still begs the question: do I need to submit my scores? Should I submit my scores? Of course, it depends. It's not so cut and dry, and here's why. So based off of the last couple of years of admissions data, those who submitted test scores often have a slight edge to a much higher edge in acceptance rate than those who did not. You can also pick and choose. So if you want to submit your scores to some schools and not others, you need a test score in the first place to do that, right? So that's an important part of it. And then lastly, some schools require scores for scholarships and grants. Especially there's some schools like the University of Tennessee. You can automatically qualify for in-state tuition with a score, an SAT score of over 1,300. If you submit that with your GPA over 3.3, 3.5, I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, but with a high GPA and a high test score, you qualify for in-state tuition. So for some circumstances, you would want that as well. So I call this sufficiently vague language. This is very par for the course, and this is what makes us say it depends so often when talking about test prep and the need for test or not. So I just pulled University of Richmond out. I'm not picking on them. They just happened to be one that I thought of when I just was looking at their language. You can look at the school's websites themselves and you still come away with not really a clear understanding of should you submit or not. They talk a lot about holistic admissions process. You can submit a test, and then they say at the very end here, we welcome the submission of standardized tests if you believe these tests will provide additional context and data used in a holistic review process. So to me, that's sufficiently vague to say, do what you want. It's up to you, whatever you think is best, except that, you don't see the whole big picture. You're not an admissions officer that's seeing all the students and all the data. So really what I want you to walk away from after tonight with is at least a little bit of an understanding of how to do this and why it might be useful, how to determine if you should send it in. So I pulled some data from two schools. This is for the class of 2025, so it's a little bit further back. But just to give you some perspective, at Boston University, 58% of students who were accepted into the class submitted test scores with their application. So this to me just speaks that the majority of students, but not a huge majority, but 58% are getting in with a test score. And that test score is the middle 50% who submitted is 1340 to 1460, and the ACT 30 to 34. At Georgetown, and this is right in the heart of the pandemic, because the class of 2025 would be 2021. There were 90% of those accepted into the class of 2025 submitted a test score. And now this is a couple years of old, this data. So then when we look at it the next year, it's changed. BU has actually gone down a little bit. Georgetown has gone up. So now Georgetown requires it. And they're like a bit of an outlier in the way that they require the test. But now, so everyone has to apply with the test to Georgetown. At Boston, 54% of those accepted submitted a test. So it has gone down a little bit in terms of how many they accepted with a test. However, if you look at those who applied with a score, we're looking at roughly 44%. So still, the minority of students applied with a test score, but the majority of accepted students got in with a test. So it gives you an edge, but it's slight, just based off of the data. Of course, this depends. It's program specific. There's nuance here, but we're just looking at the broad picture. Also, to give you perspective, BU's admittance rate in 2012 was 46%. Last year, it was 14%. So when people were saying like, wow, college is a lot harder to get into, it is, and there's two combinations here. The top 50 to top 100 schools are getting more competitive. And that's largely due to an increase in global students, international students coming into the universities, and then also more students going to university. Although there's a dip from the pandemic, but that is more so the not top 100 schools. So from there, we look at 2022 at 14%, and then even Georgetown's rate, which has always been a competitive school, but even their school has gotten more competitive. So then we look at the newest numbers for the class of 2020, or for last year's seniors, so the class of 2027. And I had to do a lot of digging actually to find this information. They like to boast 38% of those enrolled into the class submitted a test score. So if I'm just a parent looking at that, I would say, oh, wow, all right, the majority don't submit, so it's no big deal. I looked through their common data set. I looked through all like the publicly available stuff. I had to actually call and get an email response from Boston University to find out how many of people submitted a score, because the enrolled number means only those students who actually accepted the offer. And they don't post this number of 54% anywhere on their website. So again, there's a slight edge to submitting a test. They're accepting more of those students. The numbers are kind of staggering though. Test optional has made lots more students apply. So 80,796 students applied to Boston University last year, which is just an obscene number. Like that in 2012, no one, they weren't even seeing close to this. They're probably seeing half of this number, because students no longer have the tests as a barrier for applying. They're taking a chance. They say, oh, let me see, maybe it'll I can get lucky, I'll get in. It made, like, being that they had 80,000 applicants and 11,000 admittances, it dropped their admittance rate to 7%, which is just staggering when you think about BU, which a decade ago was accepting 1 out of every 2 students. So the top 100 college landscape is very different. It's not the same. But that doesn't mean that like you can't get into college. It just means that the way that the top colleges accept students has gotten more competitive. To keep it, just to like show the difference here, Georgetown requires the SAT or ACT. Their admit rate stays pretty much the same, but because of that requirement, and they're not getting nearly as many people applying as a school like BU. All right. Maybe we'll actually.
I was going to jump in there, Mike, and say too, like you mentioned, the access, like when I was applying to school, which, it doesn't seem like that long ago to me, but, 2005 to now, you have with the advent of the Common Application, there's not much that needs to be done to, Boston University has a supplemental essay or two, but like by and large, you can apply to 20 schools on the Common App, and it's way easier to do that than it was. I would argue even 10 years ago, like you said, in 2012, and that's been huge. For the like you mentioned, to go from probably 20,000 applications to Boston University to 80,000 in 10 years, like it's unbelievable how quickly it's multiplied. But as you said, it's really only those 100 schools. Like, it's not everybody. It's like a finite number of schools that are seeing that massive increase.
Yeah, and so what Gus and like your office does is try to find good fits. So I'm just highlighting some of the more competitive ones, but it's never been easier to get into college at the same time, right? Because there's so many good options for schools that are out there. It's just about a matter of finding them. So staying on the more top 100 kind of track, if we took the 2025 numbers, this is the percentage of students admitted who submitted test scores. So in general, like, it's hard to find this data. Like, a lot of schools don't pass this out, or you have to dig into like articles within the school's newspaper to find this information. This is like a conglomerate of everything that I found from the class of 2026. So it just gives you an idea of the percentage of students admitted without tests and admitted with tests. In some cases, it's very similar, and in other cases, there's an edge. And in general, I think there's at least a slight edge to taking the test, but circumstances play into this, and there's going to be a lot of exceptions. And then not every school actually releases this information. They're not forced to by like federal law, where they have to release other information on SAT and ACT. So it's hard to know exactly when you look at this information, like broadly and for all schools. But this is what has been publicly released in different areas. All right. So reasons beyond just maybe you want that slight edge in admissions, that you may want a test score. Military academies still ask for them. Like if your son or daughter wants to go to West Point or the Naval Academy, they require them. Some dual degree programs. So there's some like dual bachelor.
Astra.
Programs. Also like university, like Syracuse has stuff with upstate medical, where you can kind of like go right into the med school. They're going to require them, even though the school, like the undergrad, is not going to. Tech schools in general, schools like Georgia Tech or Virginia Tech, or even like an RPI and WPI that are more local, those schools want to see, especially the math scores, and they're going to oftentimes like weigh those more heavily. International universities, that's becoming more popular, at least with my clientele, where like people are looking outside of the US to go to universities, and they're going to want SAT or ACT scores with the GPAs. Some systems like Florida State system now requires it. And then also schools like Georgetown and MIT require the SAT or ACT. North Carolina required it, and then that got shot down, and they're trying to get some type of reinstatement of the SAT or ACT, but that's changing as it is as time goes on. And then also like a weaker GPA or a weaker strength of schedule. So in general, there's three things that are important for college admissions. It's GPA, strength of schedule, and then there's like the testing component is part of that. But strength of schedule and GPA are always 1 and 2. that's the priority. And so that's what you want to build if you're going for like a competitive school, if you're going for merit scholarships, GPA and strength of schedule. You may not have control over that, or you may have, like, like the student may have messed up their first semester, and they want to show what they're capable of. And that's the idea behind the SAT, is that and the ACT, is that it measures potential. It measures your ability that you have to perform college level skills. And
Mike, one of the questions came in about, like, can you explain what you mean by strength of schedule? And I know we would normally wait to the end to answer questions, but I think this is a appropriate time to answer that one.
For sure, yeah. So strength of schedule refers to like the level of difficulty in the student's curriculum. So not everyone takes the same 7 high school classes, although they're taking a math. Are they taking geometry honors, or are they taking AP calculus? There's different levels to the difficulty of classes. So at Molloy, it's more APs. In other schools, there's like international bachelor programs. That every school has access to different honors and advanced placement classes, and then also taking a full schedule. So like, I begged my mom not to force me to take math my senior year, but she did not relent. So I took pre-calc, and like, I could have had that as a free period, but I took pre-calc. So instead of not having a math, because I already had the Regents diploma and I was like cleared of all the math I needed, I took that extra year of math. I took that extra year of science, because that's going to increase my strength of schedule.
I think this is a good time to say too, Mike, that the juniors just got a survey today from our dean of scheduling and asking them what courses they'd be interested in for next year. And this is a great plug for me to just say, if you want to start school at 9 o'clock and end at 1:25, you will still get into college. But if you're vying for those really selective schools, they can see if you're taking a light schedule or not. So even if you've been challenging yourself appropriately all the way up until this year, you don't want to stop senior year. And we'll talk about that later as well.
Yeah, and so the one, just to kind of close this loop of like, should you take the test or not, to answer Ethan's question about a student who has a strong GPA but not good at testing, like in that case, right, like I would challenge the not good at testing. Is it something that you can get better at? But students who have like extreme test anxiety, or just are not good at test optional is there for those types of students. I would just say lean into that like strong GPA. Try to build your resume in other ways, because you don't have that test component to speak to your GPA. All right. So how do you decide if you do take the test, and like what it should you submit it or not? So I'm using BU just because I wanted to have a real tangible one instead of making up a fictional school. There's nothing against BU or for BU. But in this case, the middle 50% that I mentioned, what I mean by that is the middle, like if you took all the scores that are submitted, what would the range in the middle be? You can actually find this if you just type in like the college name and then Big Future. Big Future is a side project of the College Board that does a lot of research, or brings together a lot of information about schools and universities across the US. So it's a real like easy shortcut. They'll give you information about the school and their SAT range. And so BUs for like most recently is 1370 to 1480. And when we did this last year, it was 1340 to 1460. And this is also kind of part of the problem of test optional, is that then only the students with the best test scores send them in, which then bumps up the average test score. And so it kind of becomes this ratchet of like ever increasing scores. But it's good for BU because it increases their ranking in the US News and World Report list of college rankings. So it's a game that they're playing because every college plays it essentially. Regardless, knowing that you want to kind of find the middle and then go from there. If you're in the middle and up, then definitely send it. If in this case you have a 1430, that would be kind of right in the middle of a 1370 to 1480. I would say almost in every case, like send it. I don't see why you wouldn't. If you're in the lower end, like maybe like a 1380, possibly send it. I probably would, but it depends if your GPA is like way higher than the typical. If you're in like a 99 in all your classes, maybe don't send it. You could let the other parts of your application speak louder. And then outside of the middle, I generally advise not to send it. But there's always it depends. If you're applying to a liberal arts college and you're going for English lit and you have a 720 on your English and a 540 on the math, then it's worth sending because they're not looking for that. And conversely, if you're going just for an engineering degree, right, and you have a 780 on the math, that's where it depends. And that's where you have to knock on Gus's door and ask him.
And that's the hardest. That is literally the hardest part of our job right now is when students come in with a score like a 1380. And the way you described it, Mike, is great. Like I usually try to say to students how to understand the middle 50% is like it's literally 26% to 74 or 75%. So if you're at a 1380, you're probably around 28 to 30% in the percentile, right? You mentioned 1430 in this example, like you're in the top, easily in the top 30% right there, more than likely. So you should send that. You should send a 1430 every time. But that 1380 is such a difficult decision. And we have so many students that end up in that spot and they're like, what do I do? And I try to do exactly what you just said. I try to break it down, look at majors, ask them if that's a score that they're proud of. Like, is this a score that you think is a good showing of your academic acumen? Because realistically, 20 to 30 10 to 30 points isn't going to change a college's decision, right? But it's a very difficult thing. And you're a great example, like 1260 against this range, I would say, for BU specifically, don't send.
Yeah. All right. So just as a quick aside, I mentioned the big future. This is what kind of pulls up. So it is pretty easy to find. You can just kind of Google like big future BU, and then this will be the first thing that pops up, and you can find that middle 50. Makes it nice and easy. Just to complicate things more, it depends. If you apply to any of the California state schools, so they have two state systems within their state. And so schools that you have heard of, like UC Berkeley and UCLA, they do not look at the test at all. They originally had plans to design their own test that got pushed off and now is kind of fizzling quietly. They also have their whole own application, which doesn't use the Common App. So it also has earlier deadlines. So if you are thinking of going West Coast, just start a little early because it's just a completely different application. So these would be the major exceptions that people would apply to in New York. And then also many art and design schools can be either test optional, test blind, but they you have a very low amount of students often submitting tests, depending, of course, but
and that's because they're requiring you to do sometimes a 12 to 14 piece portfolio to showcase your ability to draw and paint and act or sing. And exactly. There's so much that goes into those that it's like the SAT is not really on their radar.
So now, finally, we get to the point of SAT and ACT. But I feel like that's really important to cover all that stuff leading into it, instead of just talking about like these tests in a vacuum here. So digital SAT, that is the biggest thing that's coming to testing and has slowly been rolled out. So the main differences are like the format and timing, which we'll talk about, math, science, and then for students with IEPs. So, I was of two minds when I was preparing this. I could have easily gotten into the weeds and talked about like the real technical stuff, but I don't think that that's useful in like for what you as parents need. So just looking at these two tests, the digital SAT is different because it's on a computer, it's adaptive, and it's much shorter. And so some students are going to gravitate to that. You know, every Molloy junior took the PSAT on the computer, and it ran without issues. And really, that was like the hardest time because you have every junior in the country taking it at that time. So I would think they're not going to have as many server problems in March and in May because every junior is not going to take it in March. Regardless, they're still testing the same content broadly, but how they're doing it is going to change. So the question becomes like, how do you know which one you should take? There's going to be a split between kids. Some are going to prefer the paper and pencil. Some are going to prefer the digital exam. The digital exam is the biggest pros, like in favor of it, is going to be that for students it's shorter, but then also doesn't have the long reading comprehension passages because it's digital. It's one paragraph and then one answer for like reading comprehension. There's a calculator, a Desmos calculator built right into the math section, which students like. The big con for me as a test, like someone who prepares students for this test, is that there's only 4 official exams out. So if there's only 4 official digital versions of the exam, it's hard to get a lot of practice. So you have to go to third party. Like, of course, my company has third-party exams. We're prepared that look exactly like the digital, SAT. But it's better to have official exams that have been vetted and tried and true. And the ACT has dozens of those. The timing aspect is really significant. The digital SAT is meant to not have that time crunch in the same way that the ACT does. The ACT has much more straightforward questions that are that tend to be like, you know, you just if you practice, you know it, and you move on quick. It's all about like speed. The digital SAT has more time per question, so some students like that, but they can play some games a little bit more and create more complex questions. It's also, the digital SAT is also adaptive. So what that means is that after the first half of English and after the first half of math, you get to a spot where then you diverge. There's only 2 buckets that you end up in. Generally, it's about half. It's a little more than half, but if you get about half correct in the first module, then you'll move into the higher difficulty module. If you get like half or less correct, then you move into the lower difficulty module. As of now, the scores are capped. If you go into that lower difficulty, you're not going to be able to get a score of above 600 as of now. This is fluid and the scales are constantly changing, and even like the difficulty of the test is changing from what we're hearing from like international students who have taken the exam. So obviously the pressure's on to get get into that top module. But even there, it's not like the old exam where there was a clear scale and you knew exactly how many questions you needed in each section and like to get wrong or right. They're not going to be releasing this information. So it's going to be a little bit of a black box in terms of how you get this score. It's only going to be 4 components. Like you're going to see like, like the 4 general types of themes that they're testing and how you did in them for each English and math. And it's kind of like you're just given a score. You're not given the test. And because these are now it's digital, they're not going to give you the questions because everyone's taking different tests and they're going to be recycling a lot of these questions. They said they're going to speed up the return time on how quickly they return scores, but they haven't done that on the international side yet. That could be because they're still doing paper in the US. And then they haven't. Maybe in March they will, but right now internationally, it's still taking 13 days to get your scores back.
Mike, can
So
you go back to the last? Can you go back to the last chart for just a moment?
yeah,
The red and blue chart. Can you just move your screen up? Your camera box from like your in the bottom right hand corner. Can you just move your box up to the upper corner, like yours that shows your screen with you talking? Is it possible for you to do that?
I'm not seeing
Uh,
that.
like in the lower corner of the screen, can you see? Sorry, like when you had the chart up, it just could the bottom, like on my screen anyway, it was blocking the bottom of the chart, but maybe everybody else could see it. So I'm not gonna worry about it.
I think you might be able to move that as well.
Okay. Yeah, I
You,
tried. It wasn't working, but it's fine.
I'm in there in the chat. I can if I'm doing something.
Okay, perfect. I see it. Somebody just commented that they could see that too, so we're solid. All right, my fault.
All right, all good. I'm gonna send this slide out. So I didn't spend a ton of time on here because it's like, you don't need to memorize any of this information. It's more of just like getting a sense. The SAT, you have more time per question, and the ACT has more straightforward questions but less time to answer them in. And so that's kind of where I was here with the takeaway. So it's faster paced, more straightforward questions, and the dSAT digital SAT is more steps to get to the answer, but more time to get there. So the other thing about the format, as I was saying, it's digital, it's adaptive. Some students like that. Some students prefer to be having it the kinetic kind of experience of test taking. And then also it's just the practice exams. To me, like having dozens of official practice exams makes me more confident because the ACT is what it always was. But I've scoured every little bit of information that the new digital practice exams offer, and so we're completely ready for it based off of the 4 exams. It's just that you only have 4 official ones to practice off of. All right. The math takeaway, this used to be a big difference. Now it's kind of getting more narrow. The ACT goes up to pre-calc, and now the digital SAT, it's going to be like more depending on which module you go into, it's going to be a little bit different. But in general, ACT up to pre-calc has more geometry and trigonometry on it, and has 5 answer choices per question. The digital SAT used to have a no calculator section, but now the calculator is used on the entire thing. It also is still mainly algebra focused. However, if you get into the harder module on the digital SAT, you'll start to see a little bit of trigonometry and more geometry. And there's also some fill-in questions. So there'll be a question where you just have to write in the answer. There's not multiple choice. Another thing is the Desmos calculator. Most math teachers have introduced this in the classroom at some point, and science teachers as well. But could be a game changer. If you know how to use it right, you can actually plug certain equations in and get right to the answer without having to do much math, which is, I guess, a good thing. If you know how to do it, it's a good thing. So that would be a big takeaway on the math side of things. One of the things that we hear often about with the ACTs, there's a science section. And so people say, oh, I'm not good at science. I don't want to do a science section. The science section really just tests your logical thinking and like critical reasoning. The hardest scientific information that you'd have to know is that gas expands when heated, or the neutral balance of pH. Things that high school students will know, but they're not really asking you like nitty gritty physics questions or chemistry. It's more about your comfort level with scientific data, reading
Yep.
charts, reading hypothetical
Facts.
information, breakdown of a hypothetical experiment, what's the likely outcome, things like that. So it tests science, but like nothing from your textbook. You're not going to benefit by having taken AP Bio. The digital SAT has science worked into the reading comprehension and then also some of the math problems. Although the new digital SAT is trying to take away some of the wordiness of the math problems to try to make it more language neutral as an international test. So that's one of the things that they're rolling out with this digital SAT.
Mike, do they still allow you to take the ACT when you retake your ACT? Can you choose to take just individual sections over again instead of taking an entire exam?
So COVID ruined that.
Okay.
That was that got on.
That was proposed, right?
Yeah, it was proposed right in 2020, and then they took it away. So
okay.
I mean, I guess that would be one benefit of the ACT though, is that it's 4 sections and you get 4 individual scores. So if you take it once and you do well on 3 of them, then there's only like you can just focus on that last score. So let's say the science score is throwing you off. You can only focus on that and get that to combine those scores. We'll talk about super scoring in a moment. I'll explain that. Last thing, if a student has testing accommodations, in general, the ACT is harder to get it approved because of the nature of the test. So they just want more documentation. They're like stingier with it. It's not that if it's a legitimate claim that's been documented, they're going to give it to you. It's just that it's a harder test because it's faster paced. So to give double time can give a significant advantage. So they're just a little bit less likely to approve extra time as opposed to the SAT.
Mike, can I just jump in to say, just regarding the IEPs, because Molloy doesn't have a program that's specific to IEPs or 504s. So if students have had a documented IEP or 504 plan in the past and it's not lapsed, it would be a great idea to notify your guidance counselor now so that we can take the proper steps and get you those accommodations. If you qualify for them, we can at least put it in, and that process can get started, because I think sometimes students try to do this last minute and it's not just something that happens at like the snap of a finger. So my suggestion would be, if parents are listening to this, or if it's just the student, please make sure that you're identifying this to your guidance counselor so that we can get it in the proper channels.
All right. So how do you decide? So the long way would be to take one of each of the exams. Students have already done half of this because they've all taken the digital SAT or PSAT at Molloy. So really all that's left is the ACT. And that's why the counselors at Molloy put together a diagnostic ACT that's happening next Friday, December 8th, so that you could have your student take both tests and then know exactly what they felt, have that conversation with them, have that conversation with me, which one they liked, which one they thought was better. And then you can also see their scores in both and then make an informed decision. The shorter way, in general, if you have the kind of student who's like always the first one done, or always getting it in quick, can read very quickly, never a problem, finishes in the first half of the class in math, that's the kind of kid that does well on the ACT. If you have the kid that's hanging on, the bell's already rang and still finishing the test in history class, then the SAT might be better because you have more time to answer the questions. At the end of the day, and I saw some stuff in the chat as well, this no longer holds true. This is an outdated graphic here, but at the same time, I kept it in because they're still testing reading comprehension, your algebra skills, some geometry skills, your writing and language skills. So there is a difference, but once you hone in on which one you want to take, then just focus on that one and go forward with it. So it's like Pepsi and Coke, right? They're both sodas, right? There's not that much different, although some people swear by it that there's a huge difference. At some point, you just want to all right, this is what I'm doing, and go forward with that. In terms of which test is accepted, there's no difference in universities of the SAT versus the ACT. They treat them the same. They accept them the same. There's no bias. In general, the coasts take the SAT because they have headquarters on in the coasts. The ACT comes from Iowa, so it's in the Midwest is its like main geographic hub, and it kind of has spread out its reach in that way. But there's no difference. It's about a 60-40 split, 60% SAT, 40% ACT. Although the digital SAT, we'll see that could change things. We don't know yet. So timeline. I'm never happy to hear when I get a new student that's like, hey, they've been working with someone for the last 9 months and it just hasn't worked out. Can you take them for the test that's in like 6 months? This is not something to prep for an entire year. You want to pick a date and then kind of backtrack it about 3 months from there and really start trying for that first test. So that's where I say like sprints are better for this marathon test. It's a long test. It's 3 hours or 2 hours and 14 minutes. And so it's a long test with lots of information, and you need to do full practice tests to really to get prepared for this. So it's hard. It's hard work. It's not just passively learning something and then you really need to apply it as a student. And so you want to like have a focused date and then be done with it, right? Like not have this like that you start in January and you finish next September. So that would be my advice. All students should take the test twice unless you get it your goal score in your first time. Most could probably benefit from taking the third time. Oftentimes the pressure's off that third time. They're just like, hey, let me try. And oftentimes that third time is when you'll get that super score, where what that means is like 99% of colleges accept the best version of each section when you take the test. So if you take it in March and in the SAT in March and May, and you get a 700 in English and a 500 on math, and then you take it in May and you get a 500 on English and a 700 on math, the school, if you send your scores into BU, what they'll see is 1,400 because they're taking the 700 and the 700 and putting them together. That's a super score. Schools also do this with the ACT. So the ACT is out of 36, but it's 4 sections. So you have reading, then math, then or English, then math, then reading and science. So if you do really well on 2 or 3 of those sections, you can take it again to try to improve the score on that one section that you're missing. And that is going to be your composite score, like your combined score of all the times you've taken it. And like I said, like 99% of schools do this. I really think Georgetown is like the only outlier still, like that wants all the scores and everything like that. Timelines for this. The digital SAT, March, May, June, they're keeping their standard times that they offer this. Both the SAT and ACT offer tests 7 times a year. So this is like very typical. The one thing to watch for the May 4th exam is it's the weekend right before AP exams begin. So if your son or daughter is in a couple AP classes, that it might be tough to like be doing full exams all in April and doing a lot of like the heavy lifting right before you're also doing AP exams. So maybe a March exam and then wait for the scores, and then maybe June might be a better approach. And then you don't have to take it your junior year. You could wait until the summer, take it in August, or in the fall, in October, November, or December.
Mike, if I could just jump in to say, like, one of the biggest pushes that we've seen with applications at Molloy specifically over the last few years is students applying in that early action phase by November 1st. So if you're interested in applying that early action phase, especially if you're thinking about schools in the South, like Mike mentioned, the University of Tennessee, South Carolina, Clemson, as I'm naming these schools, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, students are probably like nodding their heads. Those schools typically have an early action deadline of October 15th. So the expectation is that you will be done with your standardized tests if you want to submit those scores for those deadlines. So October 5th would be the latest test date for November 1st early action deadlines, meaning you're going to want to have that second test or third test by the time that, that October test should be your second or third test. You should be looking at finishing by that point for that particular set of deadlines.
Excellent. And just to answer that quick, I saw a quick question in the chat about super scoring a paper SAT and a digital SAT. Initially, schools were saying no. Now, apparently, some are saying they will consider it. I think it's still unclear, so there's not a good answer. So it's going to be on each individual school. And so this is what the timeline was to roll this thing out. So that's why, as you can see, in the fall 2023, students started taking the PSAT digitally, but then students are this Saturday are taking the paper SAT. But by spring 2024, everything is all digital. So that's where the SAT is headed. There's no paper option whatsoever. They have lots of accommodations, but they're not going backwards on this. On the other side of things, we have the ACT, and like I said, Pepsi and Coke. So they have 7 times a year they offer the test. However, because of a random law in 1980 that was passed in New York about showing the tests that you have, the ACT is prohibited from holding the test in New York in July. So you have to go to Jersey or Connecticut, Pennsylvania if you want to take the July ACT. But February, April, and June are the ACT dates. February and April make for nice ACT dates because you can start prepping in December, January, hit it in February, get your scores back, and then prepare for the second time in April. And then it's enough time before your AP exams that the student can then switch focus and leave whatever happened, whether it's they got the score they want or they didn't, just kind of leave that aside. And then if they want to, like prep over the summer for the September exam, they have other options after that. All right. So prep options. What are the options here? There's the Khan Academy has connected with the College Board, so they have a lot of really good free options. If your student is motivated on their own, you could do a lot with Khan Academy. They really try to gamify it and incentivize students to kind of build some streaks and study habits. So that's definitely a positive. There's plenty of books out there that you could buy, although in general, I don't think that's the most effective one because students tend to the bigger the book, the scarier it becomes, and it doesn't often get cracked open. And there's lots of free official practice tests for the ACT at least available and the old SAT. You could always do SAT classes. So a large group or small group, they're going to be should be around the same price. And then one-on-one tutoring obviously is, I always make the analogy of like going to the gym, right? Like you could do a workout at home. It's just harder to hold yourself accountable day in, day out. And being that this is a hard test and you want to prepare for 3 months, it's tricky. You could sign up for, like a spin class. You have lots of people in the room. It kind of motivates you, pushes you that way. But the instructor is not giving you specific techniques or tips on your technique. One-on-one tutoring is like hiring a personal trainer, super individualized, really knowing what like your strengths and weaknesses are and targeting. So that's a decision to make depending on, what your goals are. And then talking about like not being good at a test. So I used to think that was the same for me. I was like, oh, I'm not good at these standardized tests. And then I learned about them, started like teaching them, and I'm realizing you can learn, just like anything, how to take these tests better. And it's a valuable skill because there's GMATs and GREs and MCATs and LSATs, and learning how to take the SAT is like the first step in a lot of these important tests down the road. And then also if you work with someone, or even students do it on their own, they're going to learn like better writing skills. They should learn like reading for the main point, which is an important skill. And then also they're going to strengthen their algebra skills, which could help if they're juniors in algebra 2. That'll be really useful. And so, there's a lot that can go into, like, where students are like, oh, I'm just bad at these. We try to address that at our company, where we try to like, actively talk about the fear of failure, having that inner critic that pops up and immediately tells you you're not going to do this, or you don't know how to do this, you're going to run out of time. We engage with the student on that. We try to build it like confidence through preparation, taking full practice tests, tracking that, measuring progress, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, I can't do this. It's like, no, I just haven't learned it yet. And so we really try to build that in. That being said, there's lots of different options for test prep at Molloy. There's 2 classes, and Doc, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So Mr. Klimas and Mr. Kelly, who I'm sure the juniors all know, have been doing a class for a few years. They do a combo prep class. The top class is actually, there was an adjustment. They were not able to get us a slide in time, but we said we would just fill parents in. So for $499 is the one class you'll see on top. And the second one is still at $849. The other change is down below. Those dates are off. Those are dates from 2023, earlier this year, obviously. Yeah. Those are not the 2024 dates.
But those take place right after school.
Yes.
Those are right after the school day. So if you were to take that class, you would just stay after school. So it doesn't, sometimes it's more difficult for student athletes or for students that have an after school commitment every day. But great for a kid who can stay after school. Right.
And yeah, that's a good option for in-person at Molloy. We do most of our stuff virtually. And so we run virtual classes. And then later in the evenings to accommodate to those athletes and students who have extracurriculars. Our classes run from 6:15 to 7:30, like 2 days a week. We'll have an English instructor and then a math instructor, because we get specialists in those areas. And then also we have office hours every week as well. So if you want to do a class virtually, work with us. We have both SAT and ACT classes for 2024 coming up. And then now's the time that I'm getting lots and lots of phone calls each day talking about one-on-one prep. Because if you want that March exam, you want a top score, you get that personal trainer early to get yourself in shape. And so that's kind of what we do over here. Just a quick one by the numbers. So our classes are 20 hours of class time, 8 hours of virtual office hours. And then we cap it so it's not a huge class, so that we still have some individual connection, where we're making sure if we see a weakness, we'll say, hey, come to the office hours to work on some things. We can give some extra like homework on the side. For the digital SAT, we have like a third-party platform where we can then give individualized assignments and then have extra practice tests beyond the 4 that are like freely available. So things that I just generally tend to miss, but I actually hit that first one, is that colleges don't have a preference over the SAT or ACT. Outside of Georgetown now, there's not a school that's top of my mind that like really turns its nose up at if you took the test 3 or 4 times. I've had students take it 6 or 7 times to get into the University of Miami, but they finally got the score they wanted. I don't recommend that, but that's it's something. The ACT essay. So I saw that if you take the ACT, West Point still wants the essay, but in general, like no schools want the essay anymore. But if you take the ACT and apply to West Point, they want the essay. But I can't think of another school that actually wants it. It's kind of a relic. And it's really more for international students to prove their competency in English. And then do we help with the whole college admissions process is something else I get. So yeah, we do work with students through the process of building a college list. Supplementing what Gus does, because we can, again, it's just like that personal trainer, really thinking through a list, helping with college essays, supplemental. So if you're one of those students who are thinking of applying to 15, 20 schools, a lot of the top schools are going to have a lot of
supplemental essays. Yeah. If I could touch on that point for a second, Mike, I think that's a good thing worth mentioning. Like, a lot of people ask, like, do I need that? And my pride usually says no. Like, you can get help from your counselor at Molloy. Like, that's why we have a college office. But I think the question should be more phrased like, do you want somebody that's at your beck and call, that's like there at a drop of a hat to help you when you need it for your applications? Because realistically, like, I can just only speak for myself, but I have 130 students in my caseload. So I think I do a pretty good job of getting to students when they ask for help. But realistically, if all 130 students walked into me one day and said, I need help with my essay, I would have to break it down and try to help people, in the order that they came in, or, in the most need at that time, like an upcoming deadline. And that's how I try to break it down. And it's worked. But I do, I have seen students utilize outside counselors. That's not something that, makes me upset. I still work with students and work with independent counselors at times. But I think that that's something that's come up more and more in conversations. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that as from the Molloy side of the fence.
Yeah, and our work is not, it's not like we don't have any secret tricks to get you into Harvard or some backdoor Z list or anything like that. It's more of working with the student, creating that bond, and then holding them accountable through the process, managing that time. And the biggest thing on that end, as I hear, is just like the buffer between the parents. Because when it's, mom or dad telling me, it's like, yeah, I know. But then, when it's someone else, a third party, then it's like, oh, okay, like, we'll work on this essay together. They can
Exactly.
take that criticism a little easier.
Yep. Having somebody helping you organize the process is the way you said it, Mike, is exactly right. That's what the private outside consultant for college definitely helps with.
Yeah. So I'm going to send out an email tomorrow. I'll send a link with this and also with the slides, just so that it's available for you. And then also the recording. I'm also offering Molloy students or families $100 off the class, so that the class would be $895 for the 20-hour class. Someone in the chat, Craig, he asked if I do something for both tests. So I would advise you pick a test. I know that other companies and people all try to do both. It's kind of like if you're in track and field, like, I want you to be the best at your one race. I don't want you doing hurdles and then also cross country and then also javelin. Like, I want you just focused on the one thing that you're going to see, because you don't need to take both. So there's no benefit to that. And it's really, after you learn content, it becomes about building that internal clock and getting used to the way that particular test asks questions. So, that's the idea behind it, is like why I don't offer. Well, I guess you could take one class on the SAT and then take the ACT class, but it wouldn't be worth it, because you already learned a lot of the foundations in the one class. So, yeah.
Mike, Mike, I just want to mention there was one question someone said, why not take both? And I'll hand it to you in a moment, but So
why not take both is different than like, should I invest like $1,000 in ACT and $1,000 in SAT, right? So because the digital SAT is like a new test, and it's, if you're prepping for the ACT, there's going to be a lot of overlap. You could be like, oh, I'm going to try it on the computer, see how it goes. But I wouldn't invest like a lot of time and money and effort in both lanes. Someone else asked if we do in person. So we're based in Manhattan. So we tend to do I know some students actually travel to Molloy. Although I'm a Queens kid, So we do meet in person in Manhattan. And if there's like a certain situation in person, maybe we can make it work. I do have tutors in different boroughs. Someone else asked, it would be a good idea to take the ACT on December 8th. If you're curious about how they would do, yeah, it's an easy way. It's in person. They'll come in, 3 hours, they'll be done, still have the whole afternoon. And then they'll get their score that day. So they'll know. And then, you'll have all my information. So I'm happy to talk to you about which test is better, the score report. There are concordance tables that you can look up online also to see. I can send that out to you as well if you're thinking about doing both.
One thing I'll just mention about next Friday. I've been going around to homerooms, 3A and 3B, and it's very funny. There are kids at Molloy that don't know they're off next Friday, and yet we've had a slow sign up for this test, and it's a day off. So I've been joking with kids like, you didn't even know you had the day off. So we are highly recommending as many juniors as possible come in next Friday to take the practice ACT. It's from 9 to 12:15. They dress casual. It's in Molloy. And then I've been telling them, make a day of it afterwards. Go out to Austin Street. Go to QCM. Make a fun day of it. But I cannot implore these 371 juniors more, especially since they have the day off, to come in. I explained to them that they probably don't even have soccer practice or volleyball or dance because very few people are off. It's a Catholic holiday. It's why we're off. So please have your kids sign up for the test next Friday.
Yeah, that's really the why not, right? Because then you can get a sense. So I realized I also put the December 16th. For Molloy students, it's not that it's important, but we do a virtually proctored digital SAT on like for all students. I'll send, like, in the follow-up email, I'll send that information out as well. It's at 9 a.m. just like the ACT on the 8th. But they already have their PSAT score. It's going to be the same thing. So they don't really need it. It's not going to build some score unless they missed the PSAT or something. They don't really need to take that extra test. They know where they're at. Now they have to put in the work and start learning. Like testing with just for the sake of testing isn't useful. It's going to just wear the kid out. You want it always in purpose of something. And if I missed a question, now is a good time. I went way over.
There was one early, Mike. There was just one I wanted to go back to, and I think it covered it. But the question was, do the schools know if a student takes an adaptive test? Does that factor into the score? And I think the way that you answered it was kind of like every digital SAT is going to be adaptive going forward.
Yeah, so if they took it in December, they know the date you took the SAT. So yes, they will know if you took a digital SAT versus a paper one because
the date that you took it.
Yeah.
Now, I wasn't sure if because that was around the time you were talking about IEPs. I'm not sure if they meant adaptive in terms of the technology or adaptive in terms of like with the accommodations. And I think that to answer if it was about accommodations, the colleges do not know if you've taken the test with accommodations. So if that was the intent of the question, that is the answer.
All right. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm sorry for running over. Usually I'm quicker, but there was a lot. Digital SAT kind of made us stay a little bit longer.
Fantastic. This is great. Thank you so much, Mike, again, for putting this on for us.
Yes.
So tomorrow I'll send out an email with all this information and the different links and some of the tips that I shared.
Excellent.
All right. So hopefully I see some of the kids on December 8th. I will be there to help proctor the ACT. And then you guys have my information should anything else come up. I'm here to answer.